My name is Shantell Martin, and I'm the host of What's the Point? This is a conversation series dedicated to exploring why artists create art and the forces that influence us. Join me as I sit down with artists and friends to talk about their reasons for doing what they do and why they continue to create.
For me, the point of art is creating your own language.
A lot of times when I shoot, I think of how's this going to look in 10 years?
I don't really think about the individual colors as much as I think about how they play off of each other.
Oh, the point is the journey.
And I start to get a sense of what the painting is going to be like.
Because the point of art could simply be just to make it.
Very happy to introduce today's guest, Laura Rule. Laura is the founder and creative director of Laura Rule Collective, a creative studio providing individual creative direction for global brands. They work with each client and create projects in film, digital, print, and events. Laura has 20 years of experience in the beauty and fashion industry, as well as being a self-taught artist who creates very beautiful handcrafted clay sculptures. Please welcome Laura Rule. So today we're here in downtown LA, and you said that you used to live kind of close to here.
Yeah, that way, I think.
Yeah, kind of that. We're just pointing off into the air. You can't see.
So the air's good, actually, up there.
What was that way?
So basically, coming to LA was like a major manifestation for me. And it was a self-move to come here. I was thinking about with my husband, like where we should set ourselves up, what is our rhythm of life going to be, like that kind of thing. And a friend of ours who's a photographer, he had a space in this warehouse that was like live work. And so it was like this epic, like photographic studio, but he lived there as well. And he was like, I'll sublet it to you because I want to go back to the UK for various reasons. So we just picked up there because we were like, we don't know what the rhythm of our life's going to be, the flow, where we need to go. And so we just sublet it off him for a while. And it was just like, I still mourn the space now because it was so huge. There were no walls. It was just like, if that is like my idea of kind of like a perfect living style, because you just kind of like create the space in the way that you want it rather than having like things divided. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, it was pretty raw. It wasn't like a bougie set up place, but there were lots of artists living there.
It's kind of like the artist's dream. You don't have to really take too much care of it, but you take care of it, and then it's like you say, you can build the boxes if you want to, those walls or those dividers. But otherwise you get to just kind of see everything and move things around however you like.
Yeah, it was incredible because it had it was a rectangle and it had windows all the way around. So you just always saw the sky and the light and the transition of the light. Like it was really special.
Yeah. And where are you born and raised?
In the burbs.
In the burbs?
So you're from London, aren't you? Yeah. So north of London is Hertfordshire. And so I come from a place called Welwyn Garden City, which I think it was, my geography lessons are kicking in now. In the 1920s, I think it was first started up as a commuter town from London, but it was designed by this architect called Ebenezer Howard, and the whole design is ever increasing circles, and every house has a garden. That isn't the case nowadays, but for many years that's what it was. But then obviously, things expanded. But yeah, that's where I'm from, and I really appreciate it now when I go back, and because my mum's there, I really appreciate going back. But at the time, I was like, get me out of here, bright lights, big city, Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Just when cities or smaller towns are designed with intention, and the things that we give, like space and gardens and perhaps this like kind of, circular town where everyone can drive past each other or walk past each other or see each other. And I'm sure there was probably little areas for community or space to gather as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's like it's got a very specific design. As you kind of come into the main area of the town, like the centre, it's got like a whole like long stretch called Parkway, and throughout the middle is kind of like long green areas with trees and like a fountain. And then you kind of like, that's the kind of centre of it. Yeah.
And so what kind of a kid were you when you were growing up there?
One of the things that I like, well, I can look back on them because I've still got all my kind of like school books and stuff like that, is that I would always like draw on everything. Yeah. So say, for instance, like in my kind of like, I don't know, like Enid Blyton book about the brownies or whatever it was from when I was, I don't know, probably 5 or something, I've illustrated the whole book on the pages of the actual book. And then say, for instance, like in my kind of textbooks and things like that, I always illustrated for like history, geography. Like I would draw like, I don't know, if we were studying like Vikings or things like that, I'd be like, have like little Vikings in a boat and they've got like expressions and trying to think what I was like. I mean, I was definitely, let me think. I've thought about this recently where I was always, because of the school system and because of my surname, which is Rule, because of my, and then also with my date of birth, I was, when they would figure out the classes, I was never put in the same class as all my friends. And so I always, from a really early age, was put in situations where I always had to kind of like, well, I mean, I guess I could have retreated into myself, but I didn't, is like, you know, get to know people, you know, create new relationships and kind of, I always found myself in that situation. So I would say definitely a communicator.
Yeah. What was it about your name and date of birth that would put you in different classes?
I guess it's the position of R in the alphabet, and then because my birthday's in September.
Oh, yeah, you had one of those.
So I was if I'd been born a month earlier, I would have been the youngest in the year above.
Yeah.
So I was one of the oldest. And then my school, I'm specifically talking about my secondary school now, but it had 5 houses which were named after trees. No, rivers. And I was in Colne, so that's like a Hertfordshire river, I think. I'll have to fact check that. But anyway, and so because of the number of pupils, then it's like split up into 5. I don't know. Yeah.
I had that because my birthday's in October, like early October. And so I ended up being one of the oldest.
Oh, right.
In the year. Yeah. Was the drawing, you know, you said you were kind of drawing everywhere and on everything. Was that encouraged?
What you mean by teachers or my...
Teachers, people around you?
I don't know whether it was encouraged. And I do remember as I got older, one of my teachers said to me, you do know that I can't mark you on this because it's not part of the subject.
Huh.
But I just continued anyway. That's the only thing I can kind of like really remember. I don't know.
Did you have siblings growing up?
I've got 2,
Got 2. Are they older or younger?
Younger.
Yeah. Oh, so you're the big sister.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because then you're, you know, a good communicator because you're in, you know, you're being moved around, so you're having to always make new friends. But then you're also the oldest sibling, so you know, there's a fair amount of communicating that takes place when you're the oldest sibling as well.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't think when I was put in these scenarios, like I don't remember thinking, oh my God, this is the most joyful experience. Like it was work to kind of, you know, get build those relationships. It wasn't kind of like, oh, this is the best experience ever.
Yeah. And so we'll jump around kind of in time. So, let's jump around to like now. So, for those who aren't familiar with your work and what you do, how would you describe yourself and your work?
So first and foremost, I would describe myself as an artist. I make ceramic sculpture, and that description of myself is kind of a relatively young description, because in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about kind of like jumping around in time. My artist career is something that's kind of like come to me like later. I don't want to say later in life, but it's kind of like, it's like later. But then also I would describe myself as a hybrid, because my career alongside being an artist is a creative director. So my whole background has been in fashion, magazines, luxury advertising for big luxury brands and stuff. And that career has kind of like been moving and shifting and morphing in different directions as my artist career. It feels weird to separate them. I don't mean to separate them, but like the artist career and that voice is kind of like getting bigger and bigger. And so it's like an ecosystem where I'm kind of like juggling all these different balls. And I will say that the commercial work allows me a lot of freedom with regards to, money and finance, because if I earn money, providing a commercial service, then that doesn't put any pressure on me with regards to, what I'm experiencing with regards to an art practice, because I don't have to kind of like sell stuff.
Yeah.
I do sell stuff, but, there isn't like the pressure. I mean, God, that would just be awful. It's like, how am I going to pay the rent?
Yeah, you get to provide that freedom for yourself so that you have the space and time to create and make without the pressure of that work having to kind of be sold or, put elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the kind of the career with the, fashion, kind of like the luxury space there. How did you find yourself in that career?
Well, actually, so... By the way, I laugh all the time.
Good. Laughing is good for the body,
It is. I don't know why I laugh at everything, but I do. When I was actually at secondary school, I was obsessed with working with clay. So I was like, anything with regards to kind of like my art class, I would like be making sculptures. Like any assignment, I would be kind of like, oh, I'll make it in clay. And then...
What was it about clay?
I don't know. I mean, this is the thing. It's just like, it was just such a, like, a magnet for me. It was just like I don't know. Like, this is the thing, is I really don't know exactly how or why, but I just gravitated towards it, like, really strongly. Anyway, and then... in my mind, I mean, I hadn't this was definitely not like a complete thought at this time, because of my age. But then, unfortunately, my dad died of cancer. And that was when I was 18. And at the time, that hadn't it was such an unusual experience for like a family to have. And so I went on to Art Foundation. And I was really kind of like struggling. And again, at the time, because I was so young, and obviously this is like a different time in like society, there just wasn't the language around kind of like depression, anxiety, grieving. And so I didn't know what I was going through. I mean, I don't know, I was like going to like warehouse raves and kind of like, escaping in that kind of like capacity. Anyway, and then I got a brief as part of the Art Foundation course for the sculpture module, and it was Sculptor Journey. And I recognised this kind of like looking back, but I couldn't fathom what that was, like the idea of the future, because my brain or whatever I was kind of like working through and processing that at that time, like I was just like frozen. And and I still remember what I made, and it was, I don't know, anyway, it was just kind of like, it was just not a connection to, and I didn't work in clay either, which says a lot to me as well. But anyway, so I just kind of like, it was almost like in a kind of like a bit of a panic and a bit of a kind of self-parenting mode. I remember sitting in the library and flicking through, at the time it was called the UCAS catalogue, and it catalogued like, because there was no, this is even before the internet. Yeah. So strange to think of it, that I literally looked through a book of all these courses. Anyway, and there was one called Fashion Promotion and Illustration, and I had studied media studies. And so that, the idea of kind of like, basically fashion promotion is everything bar fashion design. So that to my brain was like tangible. It's like, okay, that's, I can see the steps forward with that. Anyway, then I started, I very nearly got asked to leave because I was just kind of like not performing, but somehow managed to kind of like pull things back in the first year. Anyway, and then I was going out with a guy from the year above, and all him and his mates were like the cool graphics guys, and they were doing all, this shows my age as well, like using Quark Express.
Yeah. So what foundation course did you go to? Like, where were you?
Oh, the foundation course was art and design at the St Albans College.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the university has changed names, but it's like part of like a London consortium, but it's based in Epsom, which is South London.
Yeah, it's embarrassing. I don't know where Epsom is, you know, as a...
It's near Kingston.
I know there's an airport or something near there.
Farnham, I think the airport
Farnham
is.
And what year did you do your foundation?
Oh, God. I don't know if I can remember that exact date.
I did mine in 1999.
I think I was 98. No. No, it must be... I'm sure it's earlier than that. I think I was at college in 98 doing my degree. Yeah.
So a little bit earlier.
I think so. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those are probably wrong. I'm always surprised, you know, when we think about looking back at time and, you know, when we did things and when we made things and why we made them, you know, where the artists that have had these experiences, where the artists that make these things and have made these decisions. And I always think about when you go to museums or institutions and they say, you know, this is a work by this artist and they made it at this time and they made it in this year and they were thinking all of these things. And I always wonder, how do you know that? I don't even know when I made something and what I was thinking about. And, you know, and it's very interesting. I think that kind of just showed me how much of this stuff is just kind of made up at some point. And, you know, we just kind of connect the dots and make a lot of guesswork. I mean, I know from my personal experience, I started to kind of like get to a point. I was living in New York at the time doing, this is still in London. I just started to feel this like really strong pull back to sculpture. And I wasn't doing anything around it, but I was literally like, I wasn't supposed to be doing this. I was supposed to be exploring sculpture. And it was kind of like this kind of feeling that just got kind of like stronger and stronger. And so when I got to New York, like New York for me is kind of like the pinnacle of kind of commercial expression.
So you did your foundation.
Oh, sorry, I'm really...
Then after your foundation,
We're ping-ponging about, aren't we?
Yeah, that's fine. That's how creative people, we jump around. That's fine.
Good.
So you did your foundation. Where did you go after your foundation?
That's when I'm in Epsom.
Okay, so then you went to Epsom.
And then in Epsom, they do like a work experience thing. And I went to ID because at the time I thought I wanted to be a fashion stylist. And I did my work experience with Edward Enningful, who I believe now is the editor-in-chief of, anyway, Condé Nast and Vogue and all that stuff. Yeah, and that, that was kind of like that route. But then because and again, this was all like intuitive.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't taught in graphic design, but because I saw like my friends and stuff in the year above who specifically studied graphic design, I was kind of like seeing what they were doing and kind of like picking up on it. So then I was like, oh, I could like design my own magazines, and I kind of like would intuitively use like these design programs. I still don't know any of the graphic design rules that you're supposed to know. I mean, who cares? But, and then from there, I started working after I graduated. That's when I started working in magazines. And then from magazines, I went into creative studios, and I would like work with creative directors who would they would like specialize in fashion advertising. And then I went back into magazines, and then we're still jumping about, but then I got headhunted for a job in New York, and that's what took me to New York.
That's how that happened.
Yeah.
Did you have any interest in going to New York before that?
I was obsessed with coming to LA. I don't know why, because I hadn't ever been to LA before. The only time I'd been here was on a fashion job, and we were literally like, we flew in, we shot Julia Roberts in a studio for a fragrance commercial, and then like flew out within 24 hours. Like there wasn't like I really got kind of some kind of like magical connection to the place at all. Anyway, so moving to New York was like very much felt like a stepping stone.
Yeah. It's interesting that I have this kind of like new philosophy. Well, not new, but I just feel like you should go where you're wanted. And in the sense of the things or the places or the people that pull you towards them in a good way. So, as you're speaking, clay was something that spoke to you.
Mm-hmm.
LA, for some reason, was something that spoke to you. And I just find those markers or those symbols really interesting, and sometimes we ignore them, or sometimes we kind of walk or run or kind of take our time to get towards them. And so, coming to New York or moving to New York, what was that transition like? Because, going from the UK to New York, across the Atlantic, culturally it's very different in some ways. Was that a smooth transition for you?
I think that a common misunderstanding is because we speak the same language that it's a similar culture, and it's not at all. I would say that New York she was very generous, but also I was relocated and I had like a corporate salary, which was quite juicy, particularly coming from the UK, because American salaries are like higher. So it was like, hey. but at the same time, it was like really, really, really hard work.
Yeah.
Like just the agency style and just kind of, that kind of like setup. And also I was, on a personal level, I was really evolving and transitioning. So I think I was trying to get them to allow us 20 minutes in the afternoon to meditate. That did not go down. But yeah, I was there for a couple of years. It was very like, I mean, I love New York, but I was really kind of like eyes on the prize, got to figure out how to get to LA. And, this wasn't like that long ago. But yeah, it was in New York where I was just like, oh my God, I need to figure out how to express myself creatively, because what I was doing as an artist, as a creative person, is in the commercial industry, I was putting myself into that process and it was just exhausting. And I would just kind of like come out of a project like a shadow of my former self, because I would put everything into it. But then you've got like marketing, accounts, the client, like so many kind of like, and of course, completely valid points of view, but it's like there's so many cooks in that process. And so some friends from the UK actually had got me like a kind of like a moving gift. And it was a one-on-one session with one of the teachers at this clay studio. And I think it was like 2 hours or something like that. Anyway, they'd given me like a voucher for it. And it was in Queens. And anyway, I kind of like, I booked it. And then I kind of like, got on the train and like, made the journey, whatever. And I got there and they were literally like staring at me. And I was like, what's going on? And they were like, people buy the vouchers for these sessions all the time, but no one shows up.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what do you mean? No, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And anyway, and the teacher said, what do you want to do? Do you want to do hand building or do you want to do the wheel? And at the time I said I wanted to do the wheel because I had this association with hand building from before. So I thought, this is like a new experience. And then when I was on the wheel, he said to me, he's like, I don't understand. He goes, you've never done this before. And I said, I've never done it. And I was just kind of like making these like perfectly symmetrical like pot things, And anyway, and then that was fantastic. Loved that experience. And then I did some research into clay studios and called one up in Brooklyn. And I was just like, can I just come in and play with clay? Like, I don't want a brief. I don't want to be told what to do. I just want to come in and kind of, be curious. And they were like, yeah, come in. Just literally from that point onwards, it was just like, I don't know the words, I'm expressing myself with my hands.
Yeah. But it just shows you couldn't, if you chose to escape it, it's always going to come back into your life, this idea of working with clay.
Yeah.
Even though you moved to New York, you go to a different career, like it was always going to find its way back to you.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you feel when you're working with clay?
The thing is that my approach with clay, and again, in hindsight, I even recognize it from those kind of like first experiences from going into this studio in Brooklyn, is it just kind of like, I think the first kind of like technique I was shown was like how to build a pinch pot. But then I was like just intuitively kind of like, I'm like, how do I disrupt that process? But it's like to make it mine. How do I change this kind of like language? And I don't know how or why I was doing that. I was just kind of like just following this kind of this sense and this feeling.
Yeah, because they're incredibly beautiful, the shapes that you're sculpting and creating. And then it looks like you have perhaps multiple layers of finish or, kind of that you add to it. What's the kind of process look like for you?
So the process, it's like, so it's kind of, first of all, my ritual is I mark the bottom of the piece with the number 17 because 17 is my like otherworldly connection. It's like a real, like the energy and vibrations from that number and when it appears is like significant. And so I mark the base in that way. And then what I do is I create, I make like multiple kind of like, I could refer to them as like strips. And then I just start building. But the thing is that I don't ever come to the table with any kind of like preconceived kind of ideas of how or what I'm going to make. And so the whole process is a translation of energy. So it's not like me thinking, oh, I'm going to create this result. It's just it's like completely in the moment.
I love that. So for the work to work, you have to be completely present and not necessarily be trying to dictate what the work should be. You're just allowing it to unfold.
Yeah.
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 And how do you know when it's finished?
Well, this is the thing, is like it's essentially a conversation with me and the clay. So I don't necessarily like determine when it's finished. And this is something that I'm still kind of like, and again, I'm just kind of like open and curious about it. Like I haven't got any framework around it whatsoever. But I don't know whether the process of the making or whether it's me, but there's energy and there's a depiction of energy within the clay, and that's not me. So it's not necessarily what I'm communicating. So say, for instance, like I was making this piece for a show and, I was in the studio like by myself and I was kind of like getting towards the end and I finished it. And then all of a sudden I felt this presence in the piece and it was really overwhelming that I had to like run out the studio and like shut the door because I just didn't know how to kind of like, and then the next morning I kind of, because this studio's in my apartment, and then the next morning I kind of peeked the door open and I was like, hello?
Are you still there?
Are you still there? Yeah, it was there.
So when you work in that sense, if the work that you're creating, has an energy, has a presence within itself, how do you feel about then that work kind of being sold or, kind of finding new homes? Like, is that a natural evolution that you feel like the energy wants, like the work wants? It wants to be put there out there in the world, or does it want to stay with you, or is that something you've never considered?
I think it depends on the piece.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that anybody ever actually owns art. I think we just like adopt it for a period of time and then it gets, in whatever capacity gets kind of like, it's in an institution or it's sold in some capacity. And so I think that the art chooses who owns it.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. I heard someone a long time ago say that, they're the custodian of the art,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I always thought that, that made complete sense. You are kind of the carer for the art, but it doesn't mean that it's with you forever, It's,
well, no.
It's going to live with you and then be somewhere else at some other point.
Yeah.
And so are there some things within the work that you're creating now that you would like to make that you haven't? Perhaps that might be a larger scale, that might be using a different medium. Is there something that you've wanted to do that you haven't been able to?
I'm in the middle of making a piece at the moment. Well, no, I've built the piece, and it's massive. It's like the largest piece that I've made so far. I built it in 3 sections, and we've got a place in the mountains, and are renovating like a house up there. And that is where I've got like a studio space as well. So I spent a lot of time up there, like building this piece in the garage. My kind of like current challenge is trying to figure out how to get that piece down off the mountain and to Chinatown where I fire my pieces. Yeah.
So that's a good question in the sense of, clay is fragile.
Yeah.
It can break.
Yeah.
How do you transport your work? This is obviously an exception because it's much larger, but in general, how do you transport your work? Do you, once a work kind of leaves you and goes with someone else, do you give them kind of tips in how they should transport it? Like, what does that side of things look like?
What logistics?
Yeah, like, do you put it in a box? Do you put bubble wrap around it? Like, how do you transport your stuff around?
Sometimes my husband Davey drives the car and I literally have it on my lap.
Yeah.
Like, we'll literally have a piece on my lap. But it depends, really. I mean, sometimes work has been picked up by a gallery and they've just kind of like wrapped a furniture blanket around it. It just, it just kind of like depends on the piece and whether it needs kind of like bubble wrap. I always upcycle and reuse all my bubble wrap. Anything that I'm doing with regards to kind of like packaging, I'm reusing those boxes, reusing that plastic and, using all that kind of like stuff.
Have you had to ship any internationally?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet. I've had an amazing friend carry something from LA back to London.
Wow.
Yeah, she hand carried it for me, which I'm eternally grateful for.
That's kind of an art project within itself, like that should be documented, and then that can become a photo project or something.
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You have the work here, then the work there, and then how it got there.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I've had kind of like conversations with like different shipping companies about, how to, what's the cost going to be, and all these kind of like things. So it's quite a lot to manage on top of the creation of the actual piece.
Yeah. And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't understand is like, yes, you make the work, but then all those logistics on top from, shipping to accounting to, even condition reports, documentation. I like that you write the number 17 and kind of channel that energy through all the works. How do you also go about kind of titling the work? Do you give it a title?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I would say the titles are very much kind of like reflective of where I am at that particular time. Like recently, I titled a piece by, do you know Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies?
Yeah, the cards.
Yeah, the cards. I titled one of the pieces by just using one of the cards. And then there's this other piece that, so I had this like experience in, have you heard of Salmon Creek Farm?
No.
So it's up near Mendocino, and it's like this incredible kind of, well, essentially like it's an art project, but it's like it was a old like 70s commune that has been who's now owned by this artist, and the cabins and the land are the art project. And you can go and stay there, but then they also do kind of like residencies and different kind of like programs. And it's, it's like in the woods. And we were very fortunate to go there with another friend of yours, actually, Lucy McRae. We were going for a friend's 40th birthday. And I was walking along and I saw this butterfly, but it was caught in a spider's web. Huh. And it was kind of spinning around and around and around and around. And I kind of got two small twigs to kind of like try and release it. And I don't even know how it happened, but the butterfly flew off and the spider's web was still intact. And then I was telling someone else who was on that trip about that experience, and he was like, little did you know you set off like all the reverberations for the world to explode, like as in like the chaos
the butterfly
theory.
Effect.
I mean, we laugh, but anyway, and so I used emojis to like a string of emojis to describe that experience for that piece, but then I changed it to the word. So you've got like spider's web, like I can't remember it literally off the top of my head, but ending with a boom.
That's a very interesting way of titling it. And it's interesting, the idea of like releasing the butterfly. It's like, is the butterfly the prettier thing that we need to save versus like the spider that, it's... Spiders are symbolism of creativity for creativity's sake. So they're the precious. Yeah,
got to protect them.
Is there something you would like people to know about your work that they don't?
I mean, I would say that my process is always about continually being curious, and that's how I like to I just like to kind of like remain in that mindset like all the time, because as soon as you start to kind of like put a framework, it starts to like define things, and I don't want to define things in any way.
And what's the future look like for you? What's coming up?
Actually, so this weekend here in LA, there's a inaugural art and design event, and so I have a piece that's being exhibited in that. It's called design space.
Yeah, design or underline space or something like
that. Something like that. And interestingly, I don't actually know too much about it, but there's like something to do with fashion there as well. So I'm just kind of like curious. I think it's like kind of like Design Miami, maybe. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, I'll be interested to see how that experience is. It's at the Pacific Design Center. So it's interesting that, again, these kind of like operating in all these different worlds. It's like, is it art? Is it design? All these kind of like, I think it's important to kind of like you don't have to kind of define yourself. You can be it's a bridge into that world. It's a bridge into that world.
Yeah. And the thing is all these things are vessels for transforming that meaning or that creativity or that intention. And I don't necessarily know that we need to package them and put them in boxes and say, that's design, that's art, that's fashion. It's all creativity. And I think, we can move fluidly between all of these.
Yeah.
Like bridges.
Yeah.
And so, as we close up, I'd love to ask you, like, what do you think the point of art is? For you, what's the point of art?
the point of art is communication. How, like, this is the thing. It's like, however, I don't think life is just about us. And I don't think the time that we're in is just about us either. And I feel and sense that art is a bridge into another world, which I definitely can't define.
I love that. I love that. Well, with that, it's been so nice having you here.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. I know you were a little bit nervous to start off with, so I appreciate you kind of enjoying and sharing everything with us. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was definitely like a new experience for me. And thanks for that.
Would you do it again?
Oh, definitely. I mean, talking to you is a dream. Yeah.
Cool, fantastic. And just tell us before we sign off, where can people see more of your work?
I mean, this is the thing. When we talk about like logistical stuff and all that pragmatic stuff, like the weight on my shoulders is like still trying to figure out what my website's going to look like. But at the moment, I'm keeping it light on Instagram.
Yeah.
And so that's where I kind of like tend to kind of like, I'll post stuff, I'll post stories, and you can definitely see my work and the progression there for sure.
Okay, I love that. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of What's the Point? Recorded at Spotify Studios in Los Angeles. Check out our website made by Eat.studio. Grant Alexander Peters does our theme music, engineering and editing. Research and pre-show preparation are done by Vern Molidor and Joyce Adams-So from the Shantell Martin studio team. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a nice 5-star review. Don't forget to check out the show description for more information on today's guest. And you can follow myself and the podcast on Instagram at Shantell_Martin. What's the point?